Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 8 of Featherweight Flyers, the review series for Gran Turismo's small but pretty strong selection of ultra lightweight, track focused but street legal sports cars. And in this particular pick we're going for a less obvious choice, a vehicle which is very easy to overlook on the game. Not really a sleeper or anything like that, but just a car that people tend to forget about. There are some others as well, like the Callaway, which is also a car which a lot of people tend to forget within its class. But like the Callaway and some others, this car is actually worth giving your attention to. And the car is a French sports car called the Hommell Berlinette, or Berlinette, whichever way you pronounce it. I honestly don't know, or particularly care. This car is a mid-engine rear-wheel drive sports car. It's considered by some to be a really good sports car in real life, and an underappreciated one. On the game, it's kind of similar. You don't see people using this car that often at all. And to be honest, even myself, I don't use it that much. But the reason why I don't use it isn't because it's a bad car. It's just because, of course, by the nature of the game, you can't use all the cars all the time. So you prioritise, you use what you're comfortable with, and some vehicles just tend to get forgotten by the wayside. For me, this is just one of those cars. It's not bad by any means, it's just not my go-to choice. It may well end up being yours though. It depends on your requirements. Now visually, I find this to be a very interesting car because it looks bigger than it actually is to me. This looks like more of a, say, Lotus Esprit sized vehicle, but it's just not. It's actually a lot smaller than that. And I actually quite like this car's style. It has a very unique, almost mini race car kind of look to it, with the very Ferrari F40-esque windows, and an overall shape which looks kind of like a mix of Ford GT40 at the front and Lotus Esprit-ish at the back. A very interesting, but at the same time unique vehicle. Now, the engine is a 2-litre turbo, which puts out a pretty decent 357 horsepower. So pretty well placed for this series. That's pretty much directly up against many of the other cars here. It also puts out 262 foot-pounds of torque, which is pretty good for this series. That is higher than some others. It weighs in at 830 kilos, so it is one of the heavier vehicles, but still far from being heavy by anyone's estimation. That's roughly the same weight as the Mazda 787B, so not exactly heavy. It puts out 430 horsepower per tonne, which is decent enough, and the PP is a very reasonable, I would say, 521. And for its performance, that PP is actually really good. It's very easy for Polyphony, apparently, to give especially small lightweight vehicles, sometimes to be honest regardless of their power, a PP that's just too high. Vehicles like the Red Bull Junior, the Mini Marcos, the Mini itself, and various others, they're just not competitive enough in terms of top-end performance at their respective PP levels, more often than not, that is. This particular car is actually not bad for top-end performance. It can do around 200 miles per hour, even more if you get it in draft. It's not a top-speed machine, of course, but it's certainly no slouch, and it can outrun an Elise or a VX220 easily. In terms of handling, though, which is obviously the most important thing about these cars, it's perhaps surprisingly good. Because when you think of small, lightweight sports cars, not many people's minds would immediately go to France. France doesn't really have an overly strong selection of these. There are some, like the Renault Sport Spider, but not a huge amount. This car, though, really does France proud. It's a great little sports car, it really is. It's a perfect rival for the Lotus Elise, the VX220, the ASL Ghuraya, the Tomicara ZZS, and to be honest, pretty much any of the other cars in this series. Around many tracks, the Berlinette or Berlinette is a really good track car. You don't need very much, if any, camber at all. It's surprisingly beginner friendly, and the fact that it does have a little bit more weight than some of the other cars means that it actually doesn't feel quite as twitchy as some like the Elise often can. Now obviously having lower weight would be an advantage, but using the weight that it has as well as it does is notable. What about the price? It's really good. It costs 47,000 credits, and I would say that is fantastic value for this car. That's half the price of the KTM Crossbow, significantly less than many of the other cars in the series, half the price of the light car company Rocket, a little bit cheaper than the VX220, which, as I already mentioned in this series, is a brilliant car as well. But one of the advantages of the Hommell is that if you pull the car out in a lobby, you're usually highly likely to be the only person in the lobby to be using one. I don't think I've ever seen anyone use one of these cars online on GT6. I'm sure there are people who have, of course, but you just don't see them that often. For me personally, at all. It is a brilliant car though. The acceleration at low speeds isn't necessarily as quick as something like the GSX R4, and overall it's not necessarily as competitive as, say, a GSX R4 or of course a light car company Rocket, but up against the more obvious choices of the Tommy Kyra, the Garaya, the Elise, the VX220 and even a couple of the others, it is more than capable of standing its ground and defending the French front of lightweight sports cars admirably. It's a great little sports car, and if you haven't tried the Hommell before, I'd definitely recommend checking it out. And at under 50 grand, it's not exactly a huge amount of money to spend if you end up perhaps not using it as much. But that's it overall for this particular episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.